but we're very, very pleased to be up here in Colville, and the crowd here is tremendous, the turnout, so we want to thank you all for coming. I'm not going to talk very long because you're here to hear the congressman. I just want to say you've got somebody that has a tremendous work ethic. This is his 4th town hall, and today is a month ago he was sworn in as a congressman representing And not only is he a hard worker, but he's very articulate, and a student, and very capable. He's on 3 committees, Judiciary, Education and Workforce, and Foreign Affairs, and I think as a tribute, was elected by the freshman class president. They elected one person to be their representative on the Republican Policy Committee. So I could go on and on, but I'm not going to do that because I want you to hear from Congressman Michael Baumgartner.
It's great to be with you here today. What a privilege for me. You know, this is our 4th town hall in my first 4 weeks. The 5th Congressional District, Eastern Washington, in my view, is the best district in the country. I know every member of Congress says that, but this is really a special part of America. This is the best of America, and it's so nice to be with you. As I always say, I work for you guys. I work for you. So this is me checking in with the bosses, okay? You're the ones that are in charge. And I work for you if you voted for me, and I work for you if you didn't vote for me. So, you know, I am there to represent you, so do know that. We have brought 3 members of our team in Eastern Washington up here today. You just heard from Senator Mike Baumgartner, who has an immense amount of experience in governance in Washington State. We served together in the State Senate. Mike was also a judge in the State House. He's somewhat well known as casting the first ever electoral college vote for Ronald Reagan back in the 1970s. But Mike is just an absolute treasure of experience. Great to have him on team. I also have Dan Bisbee with me. So Dan is my district director. So Dan is in charge of things in Eastern Washington when I'm in Washington, D.C. Dan and I first met in Baghdad back in 2007. I'm not a military veteran. I was in the State Department in Iraq and Afghanistan. But Dan was in the Army before he went to State Department. So he did 2 tours in Baghdad, did great work, and we worked on issues in Baghdad trying to root out Iranian-backed insurgents for some of the nefarious things they were doing. And then Andrew Rawls is also with us. Andrew also is an Army veteran from down in Spokane, and he is our outreach director, so you'll be seeing a lot of Andrew as well. And we are going to be, we will be having an office here in Colville. We're getting that stood up, and just want you to know how important Northeast Washington is to us. Those that don't know, I was born in Pullman, Washington. Yeah, go Cougs, absolutely. My father was a forestry professor for 40 years, and so Baumgartner literally means tree farmer in German. And my mother was 43 years a kindergarten teacher in Colton and Pullman. So when I'm on the Palouse, I'm not Michael Baumgartner, I'm Mrs. B's son, because everybody knows my mom. But I worked a couple summers on fire research teams in the Forest Service. My uncle was a smoke jumper. My other uncle laid out more timber sales than anybody else in the state of Oregon. So our forests are very important, and I will be a strong advocate for trying to bring increased forest activity, logging activity, better forest management, forest health management, and hopefully more jobs here. So I want you to know that. I also used to do a little bit of work with Hecla Mining Company on them, and so I wouldn't say I'm an expert in hard rock mining, but when I talk about northeastern Washington, you know, what I want is that as much as possible that the government allows the folks up here to live the way you want to live, and to create and build your economy the way you want to be able to do that, and that means accessing natural resources as well too, so I do have that background. What we're going to do today is I'm just going to take you a little bit of the basics of what I'm learning in Congress and how it works, and hopefully that helps create a conversation. You know, really more than anything else, I'm here to hear your ideas. And so you can ask a question, or if you just want to make a statement, that's okay as well too. You can just tell me what you want to think. We might not be able to get to everybody today, but we will be doing lots of these, okay? So I like doing town halls, and so if you don't get your question or make your comment today, and obviously our staff is here as well too. So just please do be respectful of everybody. Obviously, there's a lot of people in this room. We don't all agree on everything, right? But we all can have a civil conversation, at least hear each other out on those aspects as well too. So with that being said, let me start my slide presentation here.
It's the sign up for the newsletter. I'm going to be
So Congress 101, I work for about 100 or 760,000 of you. As you know, in our Constitution, every 10 years, there's supposed to be a census, and the congressional representation in the House, which I work in, is based on proportional representation. So every member of Congress has about 760,000 members, and it gets counted, and of course every 10 years it can change. In 2011, Washington State actually added a congressional district, and in the next time around, probably California and New York will lose members of Congress, and probably Florida and Tennessee and probably Idaho will increase members of, and so what happens to that census is really, really important for representation. Now, as you know, when our founders were getting set up, Virginia was the big state, and they wanted to have everything proportional, but then there were some smaller states like Delaware, and they compromised, the big state, small state compromised in our system, and the Senate gets 2 members for each state, regardless of population, and the House gets members on proportion. So that's the constitution of the process of our state. You pay me the taxpayers pay me $174,000 a year to do this job. That has been a figure that was fixed since 2009. So originally when they passed the congressional bill, they wanted to have it tied to inflation, but Congress has not had an increase since 2009, so it's $174,000. And we get about $2 million a year to pay for about 18 staff members and our 3 or 4 office members, and then all of the outreach and things we do. So that's kind of the finances about it. Sometimes people ask, what are the special benefits you get as a member of Congress? So far what I found is, so when I'm in Washington, D.C., or I'm working a member of Congress, I can get some of my food paid for and some of my housing paid for in D.C. But other than that, there hasn't been a lot of special benefits. So I'm on the same kind of, if I was a member for 5 years, I would vest at a lower level, so there's no lifetime pension at a high level, and there's been no secret funds that I've seen so far. Actually, one of the things I learned is that I have to be on, as a member of Congress, I have to be on Obamacare. So when Obamacare was passed, some Republican was fighting and said, well, if you guys are trying to push this on everybody, you guys should be on Obamacare. So I wouldn't have voted for it, I wouldn't have voted, didn't support that.
You're under the Federal Health Benefits Plan, FEHB.
Yeah, we're not, so.
Under the Affordable Care Act.
Yes.
You are a government employee.
Yeah, okay.
To the federal employees' health benefits.
Right, just telling you, it's exemption for Congress. We don't get the same health care as the other members of Congress. And so we actually, my health care was better when I was in Spokane County than it is now. So, but that's okay, I'm not complaining. I'm just trying to be transparent with you guys on what happens. If you have any other members questions about things that members of Congress get, just ask, and I'll tell you. Okay, so the branches of government. As you know, the genius of the founders of our republic realized that human beings are flawed and seek power, and so they divided up power both within the federal constitution and then with locally. And the way our system is supposed to work is that as much power as possible is supposed to be at the local level, at the state and local level, and that within Congress, within the federal government, it's supposed to be Congress that's the most powerful. Now what's happened is way too much power has gone to Washington, D.C., and then, what's going on? Oh yeah, come on, sit down, sorry. So way too much power has gone to Washington, D.C., and in Washington, D.C., unfortunately, Congress has given away too much of its power to the executive branch and the judiciary. So instead of having people that you can vote in and out of office making laws, a lot of it's gone to the executive branch and the deep federal bureaucracy. So to me, restoring our constitutional balance means trying to push more power back to the state and local level and trying to get Congress doing lawmaking rather than the federal bureaucracy and less of the executive branch. So that's the goal that we're trying to push towards in a big sense, but it's a little out of balance. We have a wonderful constitution. If we would just abide by it in our republic, we'd be a lot better off.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's our district. Here's our district in Eastern Washington. I see we have a very spirited group. We're going to have a lot of fun today, I can see. But if some of you just come out of your shell a little bit more, we'd be all right here. So each district is different. This is actually a pictorial representation of all the districts in the country. And you can see that the size of the heads are proportional to the size of land, and you can see that I've got a pretty big head in this picture. And so, relatively speaking, Eastern Washington is one of the larger congressional districts. Now, they all have the same amount of people, but Eastern Washington is one of the larger congressional districts. Now, my head is not as big as Harriet Hagman from. There's one congressperson for Wyoming, or you can see there's two in Montana, or even Cliff Bentz to the south, what he has in Oregon, but our western districts are a lot bigger. About 70% of the 5th Congressional District is in Spokane County, but then of course it stretches all the way from up north here in our area, we're in right now, all the way down to Walla Walla. And, but you can see, the other is kind of interesting, we have large counties, so I have 12 counties in the 5th Congressional District. If you go back east, the counties are pretty small, so some of the other members of Congress will say, well, I've got 30 counties, or I've got 40 counties. Well, their counties are pretty small compared to the size that we have. It's just kind of interesting to get a representation. And obviously, there's a lot of diversity on this map, both of the people there and also how they think and what their views are and who they represent. So America, we've got over 300 million people, and we're not all the same. And one of the keys to making America stay unified is to give space to our federal system to let people live the way they want to live. That's the way the system's supposed to work.
Let's hear it for diversity.
So this is within Washington State, and just to give this sense of what you're represented of your 10 members in Washington State. So, so in comparison, there are 2 Republicans and 8 Democrats representing Washington State. That's a little bit out of balance because about 40% of the state is Republican, but we only have about 16% of our federal delegation. So to some extent, Democrats are overrepresented in the federal delegation compared to the relative population, just based on the amount of people. But in any event, if you look at that, there's a wide variety of folks. For example, President Trump got about 60% in the 4th Congressional District, but he only got 11% in downtown Seattle. So who's somebody like represents is a little different than the folks here. Now remember, this is your guys' town hall. We're doing lots of these, so we can do it like a basketball. I'm fine doing it like a football game, but we'll get a little less information out as we do that as well too. All right. So we have a big diverse state when it comes to political ideology. That's important to realize. Now, how the process works, there's 435 members of the House of Representatives, and there's 100 members of Congress. So there's 535 people that matter if you want to turn an idea into a law. There's actually one more person that matters, and that's the president. So when I was in the state Senate, there were 49 members of the Senate, so it took 25 members of the Senate to turn an idea and get something out of the Senate. And there were 98 members of the House and 1 governor. So the magic code to turn an idea into a law in the Washington State Legislature is 25 plus 50 plus 1. So if you want to do some things that I did, like create a new WSU medical school, or provide transportation funding, or reduce regulation, reduce taxes, you're always thinking about how do you do 25 plus 50 plus 1, okay? Now in Congress, what is the magic code in Congress? Does anybody know? How many votes do you need in the House? 218. 218, all right. This is stuff everybody in here should know. If you're American citizens, you ought to know what it takes to get a bill off the floor of the House. 218. How many does it take in the Senate? 50 with an asterisk. Okay, for most things it takes 60, all right? So the real magic code is 218 plus 60 plus 1. Now why does it take 60 in the Senate? Well, all the Constitution says is that each chamber gets to make its own rules. The Senate has a rule called the filibuster, which essentially means it requires 60 votes to turn an idea into a law. So the founders devised the Senate already to be difficult. The Senate is supposed to be difficult to get it to change things. So the Senate is already difficult, and then the Senate made it even a little bit more difficult to get to 60 votes. Now, as a conservative who likes rural areas, I like the filibuster because I'm trying to conserve things. It should be difficult to change things in the government. And also, the filibuster gives those small states like Wyoming, the Dakotas, Montana, it gives them a little bit more say so you need 60 votes out of the Senate. But what that means is, if you have, right now you have 220 Republicans in the House, that is the narrowest majority since the Civil War. It is 220 to 215. And you have 53 Republican senators in the Senate. So what that means is almost everything that you're going to do in Washington, D.C. right now, because it requires 60 votes in the Senate, even though Republicans hold both branches and have the presidency, almost everything requires bipartisanship to get done. So you have to have both Republicans and Democrats on almost everything that's going to turn an idea into a law. That's just the basic math, okay? Now, the 220 Republicans that are there, Matt Gaetz was elected and stepped down immediately, so you're at 219. Then 3 Republicans from the House are going to go to the Trump administration, so you're down to 216. And then there's one Republican, he sits next to me in the Judiciary Committee, he's a fun guy, very, very dedicated guy, a guy named Thomas Massey, and Thomas is more of a libertarian than he is a Republican, and not always playing T-ball on everything. So it's a very narrow Republican majority. Those things are going to get filled back up. So there's one big asterisk, that one thing that if Republicans could stay unified, they could do without Democrat support, and that's called reconciliation. So reconciliation has to be related to the budget. Now, it can't touch Medicare or Social Security, so those won't be touched. But in the budget process, because of this rule in the Senate, which would be overturned, which the Senate could overturn, but they chose not to, and we don't want them to, frankly. Anything else but just related to the budget. So what you're probably, if you're paying attention to what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now, you're going to hear a lot about what's going to happen to the reconciliation process with the budget. Now, the things that we can do, that we can deliver on, and we'll talk a bit more of those, is a lot of big things that deal with border security and trying to fix our border and solve some of these immigration problems, and then trying to help the economy. We talk about unleashing American energy, trying to bring cost downs with things. A lot of those things can happen in the reconciliation bill, but it will require Republican unity in the narrowest majority in history. The other thing is that when, in 2017, the first time Trump was there was a significant tax reduction in terms of...
Only for the wealthy. Only for the wealthy.
There's plenty of time for comments at the end. We do want to try to keep this civil. But just want to get the lay of the land and how things are working. So, President Trump has significant tax reduction. Because of the reconciliation rules in 2017, only half of those taxes were made permanent. So, if Republicans don't extend those taxes, you will get one of the most significant tax increases in American history coming up. But to do that, on the process, I think it's going to be a challenge is, President Trump did not campaign on a lot of fiscal responsibility or a lot of long-term entitlement reform. So when that reconciliation bill comes, the debt limit will have to be lifted, and there will have to be significant, the way the Congressional Budget Office is going to score those tax increases, the tax extensions, they'll score them as new tax reductions. So there will be a significant score for increasing the national debt when that budget process comes through. So you're either going to have Republicans stick together and extend those tax increases, but there will be an increase on the debt and the way it's scored, or you have Republicans not stick together and you get a significant tax increase.
What are you going to do?
So it's going to be very interesting situation coming up in the next 100 days with how we, so stay tuned for how this process goes forward.
What are you going to do?
Well, we're going to get to that. Can I get to my presentation? Yeah. So the House committees, there's 20 House committees. Now, these are not in the Constitution. These are embedded in the House rules. So the House could change them all each 2 years. But for right now, these are the committees that the House has traditionally had. You can read the 20 of them now. The committees that I am on are House Foreign Affairs, Judiciary, and Education and Workforce. And these are 3 great committees for me and 3 great committees for Eastern Washington. Eastern Washington has a lot of impact on the international area. Fairchild Air Force Base is extremely strategically significant. It is our largest employer in the 5th Congressional District, and obviously has a very important role in terms of America's national defense. So foreign affairs is a big deal there. Also, we are very trade dependent in Eastern Washington. All of our wheat, or almost all of our wheat and lentils, go down to the Snake River, through into the Columbia and out to the Pacific Rim. So we make a lot of noodles for Asian countries in Eastern Washington. That's where our soft white wheat goes. It goes to noodles in places like Japan and the Philippines. And so what happens in the national arena really matters to Eastern Washington, and Washington State in general is one of the most trade dependent and internationally dependent states in the country. All of our apples and produce, they tend to go to foreign markets. And of course, we make airplanes and software, so we export a lot in Eastern Washington. Judiciary, I've gotten to know Jim Jordan pretty well, and really enjoy working with Jim on the Judiciary Committee. The reason I got to know Jim, he called this summer to kind of check in on me after the primary, and I would like to do some reforms to college sports to try to save the traditional model of college sports. And Jim is very interested in that as well too. He's a former collegiate wrestler. And we say we have 1 NFL, we don't need 2. And right now you're seeing with all this NIL stuff and free agency, the college sports model is being destroyed. So Jim and I are going to be working on those issues, but also the judiciary is also where you have things like immigration reform, constitutional law, and oversight. I was just down in California looking at the fires this weekend, and a lot of the problems with our fires has been because there's been regulation and lawsuits keeping us from being able to thin forests out, and the fire danger is just way out. So on Thursday back in DC, so I'll go back to DC early tomorrow morning. On Thursday in the Judiciary Oversight Committee, we'll be having a hearing on how overregulation and threat of lawsuits has increased fire danger. So that's one of the things we're working on in that committee as well too, even though it's the Judiciary Committee. And then Education and Workforce, I was the chair of the Commerce and Labor Committee in the Washington State Senate, and then was real involved in creating the new WSU Medical School because we need more doctors in rural areas and we weren't getting enough of them, and some things. And so that's a great committee for me to be on too, on Workforce and Education Committee. So very excited about all those. Now, you don't get to be on all the committees you want to be. There's actually, after the elections, the public participates on. Both the Republicans and the Democrats then have their own internal elections to see who gets to be on what committee. It's kind of interesting. Republicans have term limits on their committee chairs. They're limited to 6 years of committee chair. The Democrats do not have term limits on their committee chairs. The Democrat committee chairs tend to be much older and have been there for a longer time than the Republicans one as well too. And that's just kind of a difference in the way they do it there. So big issues are going to happen in this Congress. I spoke a little bit about that budget issue, that and the appropriation issue. That is a really big deal that's coming down the pipe real soon that you're going to hear about. This is like a tax, it's not income. You can right now your tax free, you can give up to $13,000 in gifts to someone before they taxes on it. So it's a gift, I think, when you're giving it a tip. And then border security to me is issue number 1 in this country, just to be a sovereign nation. And also we have so much fentanyl coming into the country right now, destroying lives. I went to the southern border last spring and I talked to law enforcement all across Eastern Washington, and every single one law enforcement officer I talked to all across Eastern Washington talked about the scourge of fentanyl and how many lives it's destroying. So we just have to get a handle on this issue, and we'll talk about some bills we've passed to that regard. And obviously national security is going to be a big deal, what's going on with China and Russia and Iran and issues in Israel. There's a lot of national security issues that are of key importance. And then Congress hasn't passed a farm bill, a new farm bill for the past 5 years. And the farm bill is kind of a good example of Washington, D.C. policy, sausage making as you try to get that 218 plus 60 plus 1. Because those of you that follow civics know that within the Farm Bill, that's the Farm Bill also has all the welfare food support in it. So for the urban areas, it's welfare food support, and then for the rural areas, it's the Farm Bill. So, and then within the Farm Bill, everybody from rural areas is not the same, because while we have a lot of wheat in the 5th Congressional District, there's only about 12 districts that have a lot of wheat. So I got to be friends with the folks from Kansas and the Dakotas and Montana. And then on the other Republican side of rural areas, there's peanut farmers and cotton and guys from the South. So sometimes the wheat folks aren't always the same as the corn people, is the same as this. So that's just the sausage making process we'll go through, but hopefully we'll get a new Farm Bill going. Now, if Congress is working properly, then the House would pass 12 budgets that go into the budget at the start of the year, and they would go to the Senate, and the Senate would take them up. With divided government last year, the House passed 8 budgets, and then they all went to Chuck Schumer in the Senate, and Senator Schumer decided not to move any of the bills, and they just waited and waited, and then that's why you got, right before Christmas, this kind of thing of, are you going to do a continuing spending resolution or not? There's a sense in DC from the Democrats that the Republicans aren't very good strategically in messaging, in terms of messaging around government shutdown or leveraging that issue. So the Democrats think they do better sitting on the stuff and waiting until right before Christmas to pass a bigger bill. But if it was working properly, so we're going to hope that this year we're going to pass budgets off and return the process to the way it should be. Okay, so the first 2 weeks, we did some really great stuff. So when I was elected your member of Congress, I'm not technically a member until I'm sworn in, so although you sent me as your representative, I wasn't a member until we first had a speaker, so I get to vote on a Speaker of the House before I become a member of Congress. The Speaker of the House vote was pretty contested because all the Democrats, all 215 of them, voted for a guy named Hakeem Jeffries, and Republicans were divided.
Remember, we're all part of your district back here.
That's okay.
We're all part.
I'm sensing that as well too. Do you guys get together and do this without me here sometimes? No, it's all right. I enjoy the enthusiasm. Hakeem, I've enjoyed getting to know Hakeem just a little bit. Of course, I don't want him to be my Speaker of the House, but he seems like a nice enough fellow. But so Republicans were divided. And we had a couple of Republicans that wanted to try to leverage the situation to not vote for Mike Johnson, and they were trying to get specific spots on some of the committees. And so that vote actually went down, and 3 Republicans didn't vote for Speaker Johnson. And so it looked like actually Hakeem might have been the Speaker of the House for a while, but then President Trump got on the phone and over 3 hours, and so Mike Johnson won it. Mike he's a constitutional law lawyer from Louisiana. He is a religious freedom lawyer and probably the most conservative Speaker of the House in America's history, very much about religious freedoms. Because it goes Speaker, and then members sworn in, and then we vote for the rules. Typically, you can't have kids and can't take pictures on the House floor, but because that vote takes place before we have rules, you can have your kids out there. So I had all 5 of my kids with me, and it was really fun to be with them on the House floor as this thing went back. It was a little bit, because we didn't know who was going to win the Speaker vote, it was a little bit like watching the Cougar football games. My kids were into it. Those of you who don't know, I met my wife Eleanor, who was born in Britain, now an American citizen. We met in Afghanistan in a place called Helmand Province on a counter-narcotics team. We have 5 kids. My oldest is 13, the youngest is 4. My standard joke is that somebody's got to keep Social Security solvent, and Baumgartners were doing our part with those 5 kids. But Eleanor's the love of my life, and I always say that, if you don't believe in providence or God, you should know the Baumgartners' love story, because if I can find love in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, all things are possible, so keep hope alive. But we're just very, very blessed with our family. But it was fun to have them out there. So then we passed a rule saying on January 6th, we had the ratification of the presidential election. I think a lot of credit to Kamala Harris for how she handled herself as the vice president ratifying the election, and I was very pleased that it was a peaceful transfer of power. So we wanted to be. And then President Carter passed away at the same time, so he was laying in state in the Capitol building, so a lot of things going on. Actually, where President Carter lays on that table is the same table they used for Abraham Lincoln, and so it's interesting to see people process. And then, of course, just, I don't know, it was last week, it all blends together, but I was there for the presidential inauguration, and it was a really, I think, I was excited. It was a great day for our country. And as many of you know, the inauguration usually takes place outside the Capitol on the mall, and they've given out 250,000 tickets for the inauguration, but it was so cold there that they moved it inside. We had something like 250 people coming from Eastern Washington to be there, and we had to scramble a little bit on what to do with those folks because I traded tickets and got things ready. And a few of our people seem to think I have like Don Trump Jr. on speed dial, and I could get them up on the podium with Zuckerberg and Elon, but those people were pretty nice. We were looking for some place to send our folks, and so I found out the Museum of the Bible had a viewing party, so we had to send a lot of people there, and it went really well. It was a good event for our country. It was so nice. And then the day after the inauguration, I led like 150 people from Eastern Washington on a behind-the-scenes tour of the Capitol, and had a lot of fun with that. If you guys ever come out, make sure you let us know, and I may not be able to lead you on a personal tour, but we would certainly love to see you in our office and have staff members take you to the Capitol and do those kinds of things. Okay, so a lot going on. All right, I'll keep cranking here. So, in that rules package, and I'm almost done, in that rules package, there were 12 bills that the House Republicans put on basically final orders to be voted on. Now, normally I would want things to go through the committee process, but all these 12 bills passed unanimously by Republicans last year, and then Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democrats didn't vote on them, but we've been voting on these early on. So 3 of those bills, well, the first bill we passed up was something called the Lake and Riley Act, and the Lake and Riley Act was that if someone has entered the country illegally, commits a crime, that they should be on the first boat out of Dodge, being deported. And there was unfortunately a gal in Georgia named Lake and Riley that there was an illegal migrant that had committed several thefts and small-scale things, and then he eventually was not detained and was not sent out of the country, and he killed this young lady, murdered this young lady, Lake and Riley. That has been passed out of the Senate, and actually it got 218 Republican votes, but it also got 46 Democrat votes, which was nice, in the House, and then was signed into law. We also, early on, passed a bill that clarified that only women would be able to compete in collegiate sports events against other women, and that picked up about 60 Democrat votes, along with all the Republicans. And then we had another bill called the Fix Our Forests Act, which we'll talk about here, which I think had maybe 80, roughly, I don't know the exact number, Democrat votes. So it's good. I mean, good ideas should be good ideas, and it's better when, I want to see Republicans and Democrats work together, so it's nice to pick up Democrat support on some of these bills. The Fix Our Forests Act, I'll just talk about a little bit, just because it can be critically important for Northeast Washington. We just have way too much fuel in underbrush in our forests. They are not healthy. There needs to be much better management of our forests, and hopefully this bill will allow increased logging activity and reduce, to a reasonable extent, some of the litigation, clarify for the judges how to handle all litigation that kind of bogs our forests down right now. So we really do need to clean these forests out, because we can bring jobs back and also reduce the fire danger. When I was working in the Forest Service, we were doing ecosystem research, and one of the things, we've had so much fire suppression in the western U.S. for the last 100 years that we don't really know what a natural forest looks like. But a natural forest has way less trees and is much plottier and has more meadows and these kind of things than a lot of our forests do now. So we need to return to that if we can. Okay, finally, the budget is going to be a really big deal this year. We have $37 trillion in debt and growing. That is not fair to our kids or our grandkids. It's a national security issue. We're now spending more money on debt payments than we are on our military. So it really has to be dealt with. I think $37 trillion, what is it, $36 trillion here, people have a hard time understanding exactly what that means, but you can see the overall debt limit. I think rather than just talking about debt, I think it's important to think about it in background. And not that I'm a superstar. I studied economics and math at WSU. After WSU, I had some job offers, investment banking, and other things. I wanted to go out and have a little venture, do a little service work. So I'm Catholic. I spent a year with the Jesuits in Mozambique, teaching war refugees. And I was the only white guy in the Mozambique basketball league at the time, which I always joke whenever I'm a conservative in Seattle, I say that it feels the same way. But I really enjoyed that time. And then I went to Harvard for my master's degree, and I taught a little economics at Harvard. So this debt which doesn't make me smarter than anybody else, it just means I've thought about economics in a long way. I also say that, I had a good purview that to go to a state school like Washington State and get a wonderful education, and then be in Mozambique with this level of poverty, which would be hard to believe from American perspective, how poor the people are there and the amount of disease and these things. And then be Harvard. So I was with some of the least privileged students in the world when I was in Mozambique, and some of the most privileged when I was in Harvard. And what I always tell people on higher education is students is go to where not everybody should go to college, the trades and other things. And if you do go to college, one, don't study something that the market actually, values. Don't study just a bunch of stuff that isn't going to have a job market for it. But secondly is go to where you get the least amount of debt. Go to your community college, your regional college. And the problem with an 18-year-old is they don't know the difference between $600 in debt or $60,000 in debt because they never had a job and never had to pay it back. But for our country, this amount of debt, I just don't think Americans right now, not enough of us feel a sense of obligation here, or that we have to be part of the solution, that we can't continue to spend more money than we have, because it's not fair to our kids and our grandkids. I think a better way to think about debt is actually a debt to GDP ratio, because it's one thing about how much money debt you have, it's something about how much income you're earning. And you think about when we personally take out loans, if you take out a loan for your house, or a piece of farm equipment, or something, or your education that you're going to be able to pay back, that's good debt. But if you're taking out, debt because you want to run the credit card up, on a vacation to Mazatlan, that's consumption. That's bad debt. And so we need to look at debt to GDP ratio, and we just need to get America back to being America again. The same country that could build the Hoover Dam or the Grand Coulee Dam, or or the freeway system, highway system under Eisenhower. And right now, the regulation is so high, and the process to go through, and we just need to, I think, and that's what President Trump wants to do, and what I'm excited about, working with him through Congress, is just try to get America back to a place of common sense, where you can build stuff, create things, and just get America back to being what it's supposed to be. So that's a little bit. Again, we work for you guys, and I'm going to turn over the microphone here, and we'll go around the room, and you can make a comment, or you can ask a question. I know we have the quiet young lady in the back. That seems like you have something you want to say. You want to get started?
If you prefer to write down your question, let me know.
Elon Musk took over the Department of Treasury, plus the computers, as well as OPM. He had his toadies go in. They have copied our information off of the U.S. Treasury computers. They've hooked up outside computers to government systems. They have access to everyone in this room, all of our PII, all of our financial information. They breached intelligence systems at the State Department. What do you intend to do about this?
Military, I believe.
State Department, not military, but I've been in the combat zone, yeah.
Those great qualifications to have. Are these trade wars that are happening now really necessary for our economy, or is there something else going on?
Well, you've seen with President, and I'm learning about them in real time the same way you are with the tariffs. I would say, President Trump has been very clear on his fondness for tariffs all the way back to 2015 when he first ran for office. So I think, the American people had a good sense of what they were signing up for, when he won both the popular vote and the electoral college vote.
No, they didn't.
So, and I share President Trump's goal of trying to secure our southern border, our borders as a top priority, stop the fentanyl. And someone in D.C., when we were talking about President Trump the other day on our side, he said, we should always take President Trump seriously, but not necessarily literally on some of the things that he's doing. And I think he's a good negotiator on these issues. I saw that the Mexican tariff appears to be delayed now for some time, so I don't have inside information on what his strategy is with the tariffs. I do know, again, that I'm an Article 1 of the Constitution guy. In general, I think presidents have too much leeway on tariffs. I think it's something that should be a power of Congress. It used to be a power of Congress until it was expanded by both Presidents Roosevelt's and then it was somewhat reformed by Jimmy Carter. But I do worry about a retaliatory tariff war and what it would mean for our farmers and other issues, so we'll have to see on what happens there.
Glad you care about it.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
We all know that there's more household income for more.
I'll repeat the question.
Is this thing on yet?
Why don't you try the question, I'll just repeat it.
Okay. You're in part of the education or part of that. With all of the outgoing that we have right now, going to the different organizations in the departments, I really feel we do not even need to have a federal education department. There's a lot of them, I think, that needs to go by the wayside. We're costing us billions of dollars and we're not getting anything back home. So I just wonder what you thought about maybe getting rid of some of these organizations that we really don't need.
The question was about, he brought the Department of Education, whether we need a federal Department of Education, which I think was started in the 70s by Carter, and then whether that needs to be there, what other agencies could be downsized. Is that what your question was?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, again, in general, you know, I'm someone that wants to have as much power in decision-making at the local level as possible. There's too much power in decision-making in DC, try to move it back here. When I was in the state legislature, when I first got in there, actually I worked with Governor Christine Gregoire, of all people, to take 5 government agencies and consolidate them into 2, because we actually reduced so the number of government agencies there. There used to be a state printer in Washington State, and every time we were talking about government doing things it didn't need to do, you'd say, do you really need an office of the state printer, which ironically also used to use taxpayer dollars to lobby members of the legislature to create its own existence, or could the government go down to the local print shop or Kinko's and print things? It's just an example of things. So I think it's very clear with what's happening right now with the DOJ Commission and with President Trump, there's a lot of interest in trying to see where you can reduce waste, fraud, and abuse, and those things. I would say, one thing that came to mind though is the overall number of federal employees is about the same today it was in the 1970s, even though the population has grown and the government has grown a lot. So what has happened is a lot of federal employees, instead of them doing the jobs, it's been contracting out to other companies to implement. So we've really become a contracting government. And so you have to look at the overall activities, not just the number of federal employees, if you want to get what they're doing. And I think that seems to be very clear what President Trump is interested in Elon Musk and others looking at. Question over here? Yeah.
Got it. It works half the time. Okay. My name is Michelle Kelso. I have been on active duty for 23.5 years. This is my husband, Alan. Together we have over 45 years of active duty service, much of it in military intelligence. As your supervisor, I would like you to tell us what you're going to do to prevent this coup that is currently happening at the Office of Personnel Management.
Yes.
Office of Personnel Management and at the Treasury. What are you going to do to prevent our president from taking the power? I have to apologize for my outburst when I burst out laughing when you talked about people just grabbing power, which is exactly what has been happening in the last 2 weeks.
That's right, yes.
That's what change looks like.
Employee Donald Trump from committing all these atrocious acts that are going to ruin our economy, ruin our government.
That's what change looks like.
And ruin our national standing in the world. The world is laughing at us.
Yes, they are.
So, as your supervisor, what are you going to do to prevent our country to go into ruins?
Okay, thanks. I'm gonna put that one in the same category as the other one as a statement.
No, she asked a question. In other words, you're not going to do anything.
Let him speak. He needs to say something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the first thing I want to say is, you said you represent all of us.
Yeah.
And one of the things that bothered me about your presentation today was that you talked about how Democrats are not, generally speaking, good people. I think you said tell us.
You want to be disruptive? I'll disrupt you. He did not say that.
I'm speaking right now. I think you can tell us without partisanship about the workings of Congress, and I think that would help. Now, here's my question. You talked about forests, but during the course of your discussion about forests, you didn't say anything about the environment. They can't thin trees in California, around LA, and that place burned like heck. And my neighbors up here, because they live in a fire zone, are seeing their insurance policies cut, actually refused coverage. We know because of where we live, that we're being categorized as in a burn area. And so undoubtedly we're going to see real changes as far as insurance is concerned. Environment and economy are linked in those two. And so I think probably we ought to be talking about environment too.
Yes.
I think, let me just say the Democrat thing, one of the reasons I pointed out that that we had significant Democrat support of those bills was because, again, I do think that bipartisanship, good ideas are good ideas, whether they're from Republicans or Democrats, and it's good when folks work together. And I was very pleased to do that when I worked with Governor Gregoire, so I mentioned that on reducing the government agencies and everything. So certainly don't want to give anyone the impression I think Democrats are bad people. Quite the opposite of that. Yeah. Well, that, sometimes you got to call a spade, and that's what's happened in your budget. So I'm not here to sugarcoat it. I'm not here to sugarcoat it. Either. It's just because, look, I do represent you. Doesn't mean we agree on everything when it comes to constituent relations and those other things. But yeah, as you can see, there's going to be some key things that we disagree on, in this room, and that's why the process works.
Answer her question, please.
Well, it's the same question we heard before. You very clear again. Elon Musk works on behest of the president. The president in charge of the executive branches.
I can't hear
That's like saying the president stole it. It's the executive branch agency. You can't say the president stole your aid. He was elected president. He's head of the executive branch. That's how our constitutional system is set up.
He is encumbered to the same regulations as a government employee. He does not get to take our information.
We go here, we'll come back to you in a second.
It's unprecedented.
You're saying there's about 3 congressmen in the House that are about to let go of the Trump's administration.
Yeah.
And then I see in New York, like Stefanik, they want to postpone it all the way to June. Aren't those empty seats going to make the House like bad on bills if you lose too many, if you're already short?
That is a challenge. I think when President Trump selected the 3 members of the House to serve in his administration, I think what Steve Scalise said, as the majority leader of the Republicans said, these are 3 great members, don't pick anymore, President Trump. So it makes our job harder. So Florida will get filled faster than New York. DeSantis is fast-tracked. It's up to each state. Again, it's up to the states under our constitution system about who they want to send to the Congress. New York is going to be a little bit slower when Congresswoman Stefanik comes out.
Well, how many can you just lose? And so
we would have to have, there's 215 Democrats, so if all the Democrats showed up, and if they were to not vote with us on reconciliation, which they've already said, regardless of what's in reconciliation, they're not going to vote with Republicans. And so you can get to 216. Yeah. Go ahead.
My name is Phil Tiller. I'm a volunteer for the local community action organization here. I drive elderly and disabled people to their doctor's appointments. I do that for free. I do that 36 to 48 hours a week.
Wow.
And they pay me for my mileage only. Now, my question for you is, Washington currently ranks number 50 out of 50 states for having the most progressive tax laws in the nation. That means that he who earns the least pays the most, and he who earns the most pays the least. So what are you going to do to turn that round to become more of a progressive taxation state so that those who earn the most pay the most by percentage of income, and those who earn the least pay the least by percentage of income? In 2010, we had an opportunity to do that when Bill Gates and his fathers and Paul Allen tried to pass a 5% tax, income tax, on the wealthiest Washingtonians that would have affected 1/2% of the population, and that was voted down by 62% of the population because the Republican Party spent $6 million advertising against it.
That's right.
What are you going to do?
So,
He's not going to do anything.
I mean, the short answer is very little.
Yeah.
That's a state tax policy under federal congressman person. We have, also, Washington State is not a low tax state. We're a very high tax state, but that would be a better conversation for your members of the legislature to have. You know, also, Washington State has gone longer than any state in the country with having a Republican governor, just as a state fact. So if there's, there's some differences there in terms of who's responsible for tax policy here, why it might not change. But that would be what I encourage you to do if you want to see our state tax policy change. Would be to either lobby your members of the legislature, or you could, as a citizen, file an initiative and take a tax policy change. But I will be doing very little to change tax policy here in Washington State.
Hi, my name's Kim, and you had mentioned our overall budget, our federal budget, and how high our deficit is. And I want to know in particular, or let me step back. So Trump tax cuts in 2017 were implemented, and the plan was to get increased, the corporations to increase their spending, boost jobs, etc. Some of that did occur. However, the revenue from these large corporations, the amount that went toward taxes was minor. So in other words, it's not working well. So my question is, since those tax cuts expire at the end of this year, what are you going to do as far as ensuring the top wealthy people, as that gentleman said over there, throughout all the states, pay a higher percentage based on their income? If you look at Elon Musk, like he's paid in the last, since 2022, like 0.4% in taxes. I'm sure the bulk of us sitting here have paid way more in percentage than that. So I'd like to know
Yeah, I would disagree with you a little bit on the sort of the impact of those tax extensions. So, what America had before the taxes were reduced in 2017, America had a much higher corporate tax rate than most of the rest of the world. Yeah, and a lot of companies were keeping jobs outside of the U.S., and by lowering those taxes, it brought a lot of jobs home. And the supply side of that, the jobs growth side of things, was actually working pretty well. The big challenge, of course, after that taxation was passed was the COVID epidemic. And with COVID, you had a really challenging thing for the economy, which was the government forced a shutdown of the economy. So you reduced all the economic productivity in the country. And then at the same time, the government flooded the economy, or flooded cash out in terms of the various measures, either direct payments. And so it really gummed up the system, one, to shut down the economy, shut down schools and all these things, and then you flood. So we didn't see the full benefit of that lower tax rate. I don't support raising the tax rate in terms of, so I will be supporting extending the current tax level on these issues. So you've seen from President Trump what he would like to do, and again, this is the power of Congress, but what President Trump would like to do is he would like to go to all tariffs as a way of revenue, and I don't think that would work very well on things. So hopefully we'll get this. My hope is that Republicans will stay unified. I mean, I would love some Democrats to come over and work with us if they agree with the policy, but unfortunately, there's on this specific issue, there's a lot of partisanship in doing that. But you and I probably disagree on marginal tax rates, folks. Yeah. Okay. All right. We got two more questions, and then we'll wrap up here.
I just want to thank you for having the courage to actually have one of these town hall meetings, because it's very polarizing, just to have you here, so thank you. I have to disclose, my godson is Luke Blue, so you know him well. I do need to ask you a question that's pretty serious. It's a serious infringement on my First Amendment right. I'm a traditional Catholic, attending the Latin Mass. The largest Latin Mass flagship center is here locally in the Spokane area. There's been a lot of talk about the FBI and their work in our church. And I really want a commitment from you as a fellow Catholic to kind of get to the bottom of why we specifically were targeted as a traditional Latin Rite Catholic. And what can you do, and what would you be willing to do to help us get to the bottom of that infringement on our constitutional right?
Well, I appreciate the question, and your godson is a great young man, and somebody that our family is going to think highly of. I think, so what we're going to do is the Judiciary Committee under Attorney Jim Jordan will be holding hearings in the very near future specifically on this issue to find out exactly what happened and were elements of the FBI used to unconstitutionally target people's religious freedoms. And so, that's obviously a very important issue. And, depending on what we find, in those hearings, there may be corrective action taken, based on that. Certainly in America, everyone should be, the First Amendment, the reason why it's first, and everybody should be able to practice their religion, as they see fit and peacefully. So that will be, I would say, stay tuned in the very near future for that issue with the Judiciary Committee. Okay, one more, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I guess I get the honor of the last question. My name is Karen Nooney. I'm a retired Forest Service employee. I spent 32 years in government service, retiring here on the Colville National Forest. I have a lot of concerns about what's going on in our country right now, and it seems like every day there is an order on high that comes out and spins what we know as tradition right out the window. I have a lot of concern about the firing or the asking of mass resignation of federal employees without any kind of discussion in Congress about what will happen to replace the critical functions of government that are being conducted by honorable and hardworking federal employees. My question is that, one moment, a corollary to that is just how important the federal income is to this local economy. We have Forest Service, Park Service, we have a bunch of other federal employees that work remotely from wherever they live, conducting critical government activities. And without those jobs, this community is likely to collapse economically, affecting all kinds of small businesses, the schools, auto repair shops, printing facilities, you name it. So I'm concerned that Congress has abdicated its responsibilities for the governance of our country to a few executive orders which may or may not be constitutionally applicable or viable by order, and maybe exceeding the authority of the president to just make all these decrees. So specifically, I would like to know, is there a plan in place, and what is that plan to replace all the government employees that are being asked to resign effective February 6th? Thank you.
Thank you for your hard work over the years with the Forest Service. We actually, right before this meeting, we were with local Forest Service talking about timber management practices. And while I was only a summertime employee with the Forest Service, certainly have a lot family history. We want good, talented people working within our Forest Service. I would say, with all these EOs coming out, we're still learning about them, exactly what they are, and while I share a lot of the goals of President Trump in terms of trying to right-size government, get core functions implemented, and eliminate kind of the waste, fraud, and abuse aspects of it, we do need a good federal workforce, and a strong believer in Article 1 of the Constitution that Congress needs to be involved in this. An example would be, what's going on with USAID right now. I think USAID should be under the State Department. I share that goal. It shouldn't be independent state. It should be serving America's national security interests. So I share President's goal and Secretary Rubio's goal with that. But I want Congress involved in making those decisions because, as we're the people's representative, and that's how our constitutional order, has to work. So we'll be, discussing those things with the administration, as we move forward on this. But it's still early days in those issues. I think I probably see the voluntary request to resign is a little bit different than just absolutely shutting the doors on things. So there's laws that have been passed that will be subject to the American proceedings and judicial system that we have on that standpoint. But again, big picture, what I'm shooting for is your member of Congress is try to get power out of Washington, D.C., back as close as it can to the local level, and get Congress back being more involved than just the executive branch, the federal bureaucracy. So those are the two big goalposts.